Well, first of all, let me just say good evening, welcome. Thank goodness it's not raining right now. We're very, very happy about that after the excessive rain we've had. But I really want to welcome you tonight to the Dr. John and Tammy Allen Lecture at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln. I am Dr. Beth Tice Morris, the Interim Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, and I'm just thrilled to have everybody here tonight. Tonight's event is the first in a series of lectures that will bring talented entrepreneurs who have liberal arts backgrounds onto campus to meet with students, faculty, and people from the community. We'd like to take this opportunity, just to start off with, to thank Dr. John and Tammy Allen for their generous support for the college's partnership efforts, which include a whole bunch of things, but especially tonight for their support for the lecture series. Our collaboration ensures that the college's liberal arts students and faculty have the opportunity to engage with and talk to and learn lessons from other liberal arts people who have gone on to be a success in life. And so we're thrilled to have this opportunity. Dr. John and Tammy Allen began their education in liberal arts, so hence their interest in the College of Arts and Sciences. And then they went on to get the degrees in medicine at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. As an aside, I'm very pleased to note that Dr. John Allen is an alumnus of the College of Arts and Sciences here at UNL. The Allens are accomplished entrepreneurs, and their foundation in liberal arts has led to incredible success and a philosophy of lifelong learning, something that we very much appreciate in the College of Arts and Sciences. Please welcome to the stage Dr. John and Tammy Allen as we give them a token of our appreciation.
Hello, I'm Dr. Dan Hoyt. I'm the Interim Associate Dean for Research and Partnerships in the College of Arts and Sciences, and I have the privilege tonight of introducing our guest speaker, Dr. Michael Zimm. Dr. Zimm received his PhD in classics from Yale University and used the research skills and knowledge that he developed and writing skills that he developed in this context to move into the world of writing and working in digital media. He became the manager of the digital media project at Digital Surgeons. I'm not sure I'm saying it exactly right, but and he's written quite a bit about the experience of moving from training in the classics into the digital world. And the work that he's written has been published in the Chronicle of Higher Education, the Wall Street Journal, and Inside Higher Education, amongst others. I'm very privileged to have the opportunity to introduce Dr. Zimm to talk with you about his experiences and how and why he moved from the classics into the world of high tech. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for having me. This is my first time visiting Nebraska, and there are all sorts of stereotypes about Nebraskan hospitality. It's all true. It's really remarkable, especially coming from the Northeast, but people don't quite have your warmth. I also want to extend my thanks to Drs. Allen, to the family, because they endowed this lecture series, and it's really about not just the value of the liberal arts in today's world, but job opportunities for that, which I think is one of the most important questions facing the liberal arts today. Where I think we both share a common bond as well is that our background in the liberal arts gave us the confidence that we could take on any challenge. How that fact pertains to them, they'd have to speak to. Today I want to talk about how that pertained to me in my own story and where I am today and how I apply it. But I guess to frame this, I want to begin with one fundamental question. Why would someone who wants to pursue a career at a tech startup decide to study the liberal arts? Even before I got the invite to come and give this talk, I've been thinking about that for a long time. In today's talk, there are going to be 4 parts to it. Part 1, I want to discuss how I got into the liberal arts, particularly how my passion in Greek and Roman history, and yes, ancient Greek and Latin arose. Part 2 is going to discuss my transition from an academic life into where I am today, into digital marketing. In the third part, I want to discuss briefly some opportunities for partnership between the liberal arts and the private sector. And in part 4, I want to also give advice to the business community on why, particularly the tech community, why they should recruit liberal arts undergrads. So where do I begin? Let's start about 17 years ago. When I was an undergrad, like many of you, I did my undergraduate degree at New York University. I was a history major because I loved history. I loved studying the lessons of the past. The problem was for the first 3 years, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with myself, which I'm sure many undergrads here. What are you going to do with that degree? How are you going to market it? How are you going to use it? And the advice I got was probably similar to advice that many people get. Study something marketable. Do something that can get you a job. But I fundamentally took issues with that because I wanted to determine what is marketable. I don't need someone to tell me what I can do with a degree. I felt like that was always a very unimaginative answer to receive. I'll determine what is marketable, and I'm going to use that for my own career goals, whatever those may be. The transformative moment in my undergraduate career occurred when I spent a semester studying abroad in Florence in the spring of 2004. So I've just aged myself. I go back away. And for some reason, I decided to take a trip in Easter 2004. This would have been around in April 2004. I took a trip to Sicily. I went to the ancient, and I decided, there's an ancient city that I've heard called Syracuse. I want to visit it and see what it's all about. At one time, Syracuse was the most powerful city in the Western Mediterranean. And I heard there were some really powerful, interesting ruins there. And when I went, I visited the Great Theater of Syracuse, which you can all go, if any of you happen to be in Sicily, I'd strongly recommend you go visit it and see it to this day. I sat in the theater, and I remember it was a beautiful spring day. The smell in Sicily is so powerful. It's just the smell of almonds, of lemons. It really touches all the senses. And I sat down in the theater where the plays of Aeschylus, the great Greek Athenian playwright, Sophocles, and Euripides were once performed. And I looked at the theater, and I knew it was a ruin. It wasn't being taken care of. Yet I was in awe of the beauty and wonder of this seemingly decrepit theater. By chance, a few months earlier, where I happened to live that time in Central Florida, I had driven by a Kmart. How many people here know what Kmart even is? Okay, yes. They used to be at one point almost as common as Walmarts. But I drove by a Kmart that happened to fall into disrepair, went out of business, as many of them would eventually. And within 2 years, it looked like a piece of rubble that was just an eyesore on the highway. And I asked myself, why is it the Greeks and Romans from America build these theaters, and they fall into disrepair, and I'm still in awe of them over 2,000 years later, yet we build buildings, and then after a short time, they look terrible. They ruin our neighborhoods. And I said, there is grandeur here. There is beauty. I want to study the Greeks and the Romans. I want to know everything about them. And I started to dive deeper and deeper into the history over the course of that summer and developed an utter fascination with Greek and Roman literature, Greek and Roman philosophy, and Greek and Roman history. The problem was I didn't know Greek or Latin. I knew I wanted to get a PhD. All the undergrads here were probably ahead of me because I was almost done my undergraduate career, and I didn't know what to do with myself. But I just knew I wanted to get a classics PhD, and that I wanted to be an educator. I wanted to be like a professor, and I wanted to take the lessons of the Greeks and Romans and apply them in today's world. Because I thought that the lessons I was reading from the works of Plutarch, Thucydides, and Herodotus, they have value today. And I want people to be able to take that and use it in the private sector. I always had that vision for myself. But I didn't know any Greek or Latin. So I went home that summer, I got myself a Latin book, and I taught myself intensive Latin, just through a textbook. But I wasn't good enough to get into a PhD program. So I graduated, wasn't sure I wanted to do it myself, and I enrolled in UCLA for a year and did a post-baccalaureate program in classics. I intensively studied the language for 1 year. And I applied to grad school saying, okay, I'm going to get in, my career's all set, everything's going to be very linear, it's going to be great. My first big hurdle, I got rejected in 2006. And over the course of my travail trying to get into grad school, I realized that I had several values that I discovered that are worth their weight in gold in the world today, but I didn't realize how much value they were actually worth at the time. And that was my first interaction with grit. Because I got rejected, and I think a lot of people would have given up at that point. I said, okay, I just need to learn more Greek and Latin. So I moved to Israel for 3 years and did a master's at Tel Aviv University, studying Greek and Latin for 3 years. And in 2007, I got rejected, and once again in 2009, I got rejected, which is demoralizing. 3 successive years of failure. And I failed, without question. But I didn't give up. And I said, I knew at that time I had this thing called grit. I'm not going to give up yet. I know it has value. I'm just not entirely sure what that value is. And as I read more and more Greek text, I realized that's something else, and that was an unquenchable curiosity. Curiosity is worth a lot. Curiosity is the doting sibling of innovation. Great innovations and discoveries are made because people are simply curious. Being curious for the sake of being curious is often a trait that I look at when I meet new people, and I can figure out whether or not they have something unique. Do they ask questions just for the sake of asking the question, or they want to learn just for the sake of learning? So that was a second value that I learned at the time. And as I was reading this ancient text, I became quite comfortable with not getting a straight answer. We know often in our world, someone reads something and they just want to know, well, what's the answer? I became very comfortable with saying, I don't know the answer. It could be this, it could be that. That could be one way of interpreting this political event in 425 in Athens. This could be another way of interpreting that political event. But regardless, I was okay with that. And ambiguity is one, we're taught, so many skills in this world, we're often taught that if we learn something, it will have a one-to-one linear correspondence to what we do. It's not really how the world works. I sort of hypothesized that at the time, but now that I'm in this startup world, it's very true, because you're constantly dealing with ambiguity. And situations where, what's the answer? I don't know. Let's test this out. Let's try that. But if you're looking for a very straight playbook, that's not existence as I understand it. And finally, in the spring of 2010, though, I got into grad school at Yale. And I thought I'd be smooth sailing at that point. I spent 6 years structuring my PhD, and it was my first big interaction with what I call project management, because that's really what a PhD is. Usually, though, when you do a project management, you do a much smaller scale. You do it with 1 to 2 months, or maybe a year or two. With a PhD, it can be a 6-year process. You have all these milestones you have to hit, like you have to pass your qualifying exams, you have to pass, your prospectus has to be approved. As I was going through each one of these, I sort of made notes to myself, okay, I'm hitting my milestones. I didn't think it was possible to really plan something. It takes 6 years. But it was a very rewarding experience being able to pull that off. And by 2016, so about 12 years since I sat in that theater in Syracuse, I walked across the PhD stage at Yale, and I received my doctorate. Unfortunately, I also didn't have a job. So the joy of getting my PhD was unfortunately counterbalanced by what seemed like unemployment at that time. My ambitions came to a screeching halt. There were a couple of ways I realized I could handle that adversity. One was you just keep on trying. You apply in the academic job market again, you try to get another tenure track job, you apply for postdocs. I said, I can do that, but I don't think that's a good use of my time, of my earning power. And my wife, who works at Yale now, she had a very good job, and at the time I had a 1-year-old son. I didn't want to uproot them. I didn't want to do it to my family. And I said, now I'm going to make a career transition. To what? I was a classics PhD, And when I first got advice on, I was asking people, what should I do? Like, what should I do with myself now? One of them, the two most common answers, go to law school, which is basically kicking the can down the road, or become a high school Latin teacher. Utterly safe advice, utterly respectable advice, and utterly unimaginative is the way I saw it. There was no vision there. It was all very trite as I saw it when I got that advice. And I said no to the advice I was getting from family, from loved ones who had my best interest at heart. And when I looked around, for a series of reasons, a bit complicated to go into right now, I got fascinated by technology. New technologies like augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality, blockchain technologies, cloud-based softwares, it all fascinated me. And at the time I realized, well, if I've used my knowledge to get really deep into Greek and Latin for years, and for those of you, anyone here who's never studied Greek or Latin, they're very intense languages. It's almost a misnomer to call computer language a language because that implies that a human language is logical. They're actually not. Ancient Greek is a very complicated language. And I knew, whether other people knew that or not, that if I could conquer this, I can conquer everything. Why not? It can't be too complicated. And at first, everyone said, Mike, you're not going to join a technology company. You don't have the background. You're not a coder or a designer. I was like, that's exactly why a technology company wants me. How many classicists do you meet at a technology startup? They're rare. You never meet them, to be honest. I think I'm one of the only ones. There are, I think, a couple out there, but there aren't that many. So that will make me a novelty to any curious organization. They're going to just simply want to have a conversation and find out, well, what is a classics PhD? Because 99% of people on the planet, especially outside the university, have no idea what classics is. But that's an asset. If you frame it right, it is a tremendous asset I realized I had at my disposal, whether or not other people realize that or not. And I realized that I did the math in my head. I said, well, the chances of me getting any one job are quite low. But statistically, if I play the numbers game, I'll eventually get something. They're quite high. It's the same strategy used for dating. You ask a lot of people. Eventually, one will say yes, and that person's my wife to this day. So there you go. Play the numbers. They'll eventually work out in your favor. And as I started to reach out to companies, I was often hearing crickets. I heard nothing. Because I was applying online, I was very naive. I was like, I'm not hearing anything. And I immediately realized HR is filtering me out. And I understood why, because they probably have software that says you need to check off certain skill sets. Well, Greek and Latin was not one of them. They weren't asking for that. And I was getting filtered out of the system. So I said, okay, I'm going to circumvent the system. Ignore HR, just reach out directly to CEOs and to hiring managers, get their emails, and contact them. And if you can't contact them, then just show up and say, I'm here. Do you want to talk? Which led to some really interesting encounters. And as I was exploring, I did get down at points because sometimes you hear crickets. But again, I knew like I'm eventually going to get something. I'm going to bring value to someplace. And one day, as I was driving along I-91, which is one of the main highways that goes to New Haven, Connecticut, where I live today, and it goes from New Haven all the way up to Canada, I went by this building that said Digital Surgeons. It looked very cool. I had no idea what they did. Which is fair because they had no idea what I did either. So I knew we were going to have an immediate bond. And I sent an email to them saying, hey, I'm a liberal arts PhD. I'd love to find out what you do. And I don't know. I didn't really know anything. Actually, no. Let me be careful. I didn't know anything about marketing. Zero. Let alone digital marketing. I'm fairly certain everyone in this room, going back a few years, knew more about marketing than I did. It just wasn't even part of my vocabulary. I didn't know what it was. And I sent an email, and before I knew it, a couple days later, the CEO, whose name is Pete Senna, I got an email saying, our CEO, Pete Senna, would like to meet you. So I said, okay. He's like, come in the next day. And I wasn't sure what I was going to talk about. And I said, the normal thing to do, I emphasize the normal thing, would be read about what the company does and to learn about marketing. That's not how I operate, though. What I know really well is I know rhetoric. I've studied it for years. I know that rhetoric is powerful. Rhetoric is how you can control a crowd. Rhetoric is how you can communicate with people. Figures of speech. And the Greeks and the Romans, the best at persuasion. I've been studying this for a year. If you read the speeches of Cicero, you're going to very quickly pick up all these rhetorical techniques for connecting with an audience. So I said, that's what I need to channel in the 24 hours I have right now at my disposal before I meet him. Because I want to be unapologetically me. I'm not going to be anything other than me. And one of the most powerful figures of speech is metaphor. We think in metaphor. We do not think in terms of complicated language. We think in terms of simple language. And if you really want to connect with someone, always use a metaphor rather than complicated language to express an idea. And when I got in, I sat down, and Pete asked me, why do you want to go? Like, I don't even know anything about academia. Why would you want to go from academia to a tech startup? Like, and why? And I told him about the Quilt of Knowledge. He's like, what's the Quilt of Knowledge? And I said, well, there's a Quilt of Knowledge. And on that quilt are individual tiles. There's a tile for computer science. There's a tile for classics. There's a tile for history. Each one of those tiles represents a particular domain of knowledge. And from my perspective, as an academic, I was getting very, very deep into the threads of a particular tile. And what I always wanted to do was to find ways to move from one tile to the next and find ways for them to interact with each other and to show their value, that really it's all one. These tiles all connect in their own way. It's one big quilt when you stand far enough back, that everyone should be studying different parts of the tile rather than just focusing on one. And I want to take what I've learned and apply it at a company like yours and talk to coders and designers, show them why they should care about Greek and Roman history and find ways to drive value. And then for the rest of the talk, I went on about the origins of Greek tragedy and the god Dionysus. And after 30 minutes, Pete said, I have no idea what you'll do here, but man, do I see a why. He says, you're one of us. I was like, am I? He's like, yeah, you are. I was like, I don't know what you do. He's like, it's okay. We'll figure that out. He says, I'm going to give you an assignment. I was like, what's the assignment? And he says, I want you to do a website audit of one of their clients that happened to be a big e-commerce brand. Now, I'm fairly certain that he was trying to beat the system of Google, because when I Googled website audit, I had no idea what it was. And I asked him for clarification. I was like, what's a website audit? And he says, you have a PhD in classics, figure it out. Okay. And then he's like, and by the way, in the tech world, in the startup world, things move fast, so you have about 24 hours. I was like, okay. So I went home, and once again, I looked at the company, and it's amazing how valuable writing is a skill set in our world today. You're in a university right now, so you're surrounded by great writers. Rest assured, when you go into the world, you will see that writing is an in-demand skill set. It's very hard to come across it, because I've seen Fortune 500 companies that have websites where I have no idea what they're talking about. How could a publicly traded company have a website where the language is that bad is beyond me. But that's the world that we live in. And I went in and I had no idea what this company did. And what I did was I said, well, I've read lots of Thucydides, lots of Tacitus, who's a Roman historian, lots of Cicero, lots of Demosthenes, so I'm pretty good at rhetoric at this point, and I know the value of anaphora, assonance, a syndeton. These are all powerful rhetorical figures of speech. And if you don't know what they are, go take a rhetoric class, because they're very cool and they're very powerful. So why don't I use that to come up with my own interpretation of what a website audit is, because clearly I'm not getting Google has failed me. And I spent 24 hours giving a list of recommendations of what I thought a website audit was, and of recommendations for how this company, this powerful e-commerce company, could improve their web presence. I got that back, and literally 24 hours later, my apartment was burglarized, which was very depressing. I distinctly remember coming home, my laptop was gone, pictures were gone, and I was dealing with the insurance company. I almost forgot that I had sent this back to Pete. And while I'm doing the insurance companies, I get a phone call, and I answer. I'm like, hello? He's like, hey, Mike, this is Pete. I was like, oh, hey, Pete. And he's like, how are you doing? And I said, I'm not in the right state of mind here. My apartment was just burglarized. I'm not, what's up? And he's like, oh, I'm really sorry to hear that. And he said, listen, I just want to tell you, I read your website audit. this is awesome. We could use someone who knows Greek and Roman history. Come here. Come join us. Because you didn't know anything about digital marketing, but you gave me this, and this is better than a lot of the stuff I see from digital marketers. Come here. Come join us. Come work for us for 3 months. If after 3 months, Pete says, like, if after 3 months you hate me, I'll help you find another job. I don't think you're going to hate me. I think you're going to love me. I think we're going to do wonderful things together. But you're one of us. I was like, well, what will I do? He's like, that's not as important. We're going to figure that out. We'll figure that out together. We're a startup. He says, we're always growing, and we need to figure out new revenue sources. So come here, we'll figure that out. I was like, all right. And so I get there, and as we're talking, he's like, we need to figure out what you're going to do, because we do have a bottom line. And what do you like? And one of the things I told him about was I said, I love history. What history is it's taking data, and you synthesize that into a narrative. So if you can take data, whether it's from 5th century Athens or from 1st century BC Rome, and synthesize that into a coherent narrative, then I can do it with website analytics. That was my assumption, at least at the time. I was like, well, I look at data, and what I've been doing for years is really just creating a story about that. And he says, okay, you can do that for clients. How? He's like, through analytics. What are analytics? He's like, I'll show you. It was very much a hand-holding process for about 6 months, where I did make mistakes. I deleted some folders I shouldn't have. We were able to recover the client, don't worry. But that was the kind of process that was training me. And over time, I got very into something called search engine optimization. That is the science of how one ranks on Google. Because Google is just based on all sorts of different algorithms that rank a website based on different features. And if you know them, you can help a company improve its digital presence. And then the other thing that I took upon myself was to become the digital media go-to guy in our company, the digital media manager. It didn't exist when I came, but I realized that being in a startup was not that different in many ways from being in academia, where you're constantly, no one really tells you what to do. You just know you have to make money. You have to create value. It's like when someone comes up with a research paper, no one usually tells them what to do. You have to figure that out for yourself and then come up with something that's valuable after that research experience. And for me, I went through the company and saw that I looked at areas where I thought the company could grow, just based on where the revenue was. And that's where I am today in the company as a digital media manager. I work with things like Google AdWords. That's the advertising system for Google. Most people do not know this, but 90% of Google's revenue comes from their advertising. And very few people have asked them, how does Google make money? They're going to just throw up their hands. It's this incredibly complicated system called the Google AdWords system, which I work with. I am privileged to work with the people that I work with in my company today. Being at a tech startup transformed my view of the liberal arts and its value. It didn't negate it. It's helped me reimagine it. Not a day goes by where I don't get an invite to discuss something with the ancient world. Our creative director, James Dowd, we just finished covering Greek history over 20 lunches and God knows how many beers. One of the best coders that I know, his name is Jake Burden. He is a philosophy major. He's a phenomenal JavaScript developer. And in our spare time, we don't talk about business, we talk about philosophy. We talk about Plato, and we talk about life. And I asked him once, I said, do you regret majoring in philosophy? Because allegedly that's not that valuable of a major. And he says, first of all, I don't need to major in computer science to be a great coder. He's like, I just do it on my own. And he just loves hacking. But he feels like this helps me live a good life, studying philosophy. And I apply it every day. Another one of the great coders, his name's Adam Sofer, he's a trained musician. A musician who decided to become a great coder afterwards. And he works with Ethereum development. He's a blockchain developer, which is it's a very complicated form of computer programming. But what all the people have in common in my company, including this from the CEO to the account managers to the designers, is this love of knowledge just for the sake of knowledge. And not necessarily demanding what you might expect perhaps from someone who's more of a linear mindset of, well, how's this going to make me money? Sometimes the great ideas come from the conversations about history, about literature. And from that, we create value. And even now, as I look at the tech world, not a day goes by I do not learn about some entrepreneur. Again, if you ask most people, and this is my perspective before I went to tech, what's the background of all these tech entrepreneurs? You'd immediately assume a software engineer. That's sort of the perception we have in mind. But let me just rattle off a few names to give you a catalog of some of the people that are great tech entrepreneurs today that do not have they have liberal arts backgrounds. Stuart Butterfield, the founder of Slack, the fastest growing B2B enterprise software company. He has BA in philosophy, and then he got his MPhil in philosophy from Cambridge University. He did not go into academia because he was told there weren't that many academic jobs. But he then decided to start a startup. And he is one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the Valley today. And they say if you go to a Slack boardroom meeting, it's not unusual to listen to him talk about Plato and riff on that. Reid Hoffman, the COO, the Chief Operating Officer of PayPal, he then became the CEO of LinkedIn. Everyone here should know what LinkedIn is. And he is a philosopher by training. He says he's actually just an applied philosopher. That's how he describes himself. He created a powerful company with his liberal arts background. Alexa Hirschfeld, who got a BA in classics and is the co-founder of Paperless Post, which is an e-card company. So everywhere I looked, I realized in the tech world, and I sort of had this hunch, the people there are interesting. They're going to appreciate someone like me, my liberal arts background. And that hypothesis has only been proved true as time has gone on. And I consider myself incredibly fortunate to be a part of a company like that. And all of the skill sets that I cultivated, which at the time I didn't realize what their value was. Its value only became apparent to me once I went into the tech world, were the value of curiosity. Being curious just for the sake of being curious, and not necessarily asking what's the ROI of that curiosity, what's the return on investment there. Curiosity just for the sake of curiosity can lead to amazing innovation. The value of grit, that's a tough one for HR to filter for. I was talking to my CEO, Pete, about it. He said he still has no idea really how do you find people that have this quality called grit, because it's incredibly important, especially when you're working late nights and you're trying to push through a project. That is worth its weight in gold. And 3, being comfortable with ambiguity. Being able to say, well, this is one answer, and that can be another answer, and that can be another answer. Because in the world I'm in today, there often aren't straightforward answers. Let's try this as a solution, and it doesn't work. You don't just give up. You're like, okay, and we define something else. This could work, that could work. Let's test it out and see what happens. So I've learned quite a bit about how those values can drive growth for a tech startup. For the students here today, I know many of you probably get advice from your parents on when you study something marketable. I lived in a world where what it means to do something marketable almost means nothing, because everyone has an unusual background. But those are the people I like to surround myself with at this point, because I get so many good ideas from them, and we are growing something special together. I want to give some advice to the professors here too, because I know there's so many attacks on the liberal arts today. I'm sure there are calls to cut the liberal arts here in Nebraska. There are calls for it across the board. Doesn't matter what university you're at, whether private university or public university. Build connections with the private sector. Reach out to local startups. Reach out to them. Tell them, like, hey, just build that connection. Say, hey, I just want to have a conversation with you, and could you find a potential internship opportunity for a student of mine? Because I feel like, especially for businesses, I don't know if there's anyone in the business community here, but when I was beginning my search to leave academia, one of the best pieces of advice I gave was someone says, Mike, you don't want a job. I was like, I don't? They said, no, you want an internship. I was like, what do you mean? They said, you need to get professional experience. That's your passport into the business world today. Because it's so risky for a business just to hire someone right out of the gate, no matter how many no matter how qualified they are for the job, it takes about 3 to 6 months to find out whether or not someone is a secure hire. Again, they can check off every box on the wish list. Then they go there, and for whatever reason, it doesn't work out. So for businesses, if they can be incentivized in a way to hire someone and perhaps get a tax credit, maybe get a tax credit or a tax deduction, whatever it is, from the state for hiring a liberal arts undergrad for a summer internship. That will, one, the business can solve some pressing business need for them. 2, it allows them to test out a candidate. Because if they like you after 3 months, I got news for you, they're not going to let you go. They're going to want to hire you full time. And 3, it's a great opportunity for professors and the university to build relationships with the local community. Because especially at Digital Surgeons, the co-founder of Digital Surgeons, along with the founder, Pete Senn, and his co-founder, Dave Salinas, they were very strong believers in local startups and local businesses. We're sick and tired of hearing about everyone going to New York, Boston, or San Francisco to start a company. Think about it. You have all this great talent here, all these great minds. Yet it's almost a tease. After 4 years, they often tend to leave. They tend to go somewhere else. What if there's a way to capture that talent here and keep it to help? One, it's great for the local economy here in Lincoln. We certainly think this way in New Haven, creating a startup culture to help grow the New Haven community, but also the Connecticut economy. But it'd be a great way to try and keep someone here after they graduate and retain it and help grow the Lincoln economy, particularly through technology startups. Because I've already looked online, I can tell you have your tech startups here, but how many people here have actually reached out to those businesses and say, hey, I have a student who's a great writer. And I've looked at your website and it's awful. But he can come and he can do a lot of writing, he can write white papers, and he can find ways to help you improve your organic search writing simply through writing. It says it can be as valuable to you as a coder who knows JavaScript. That's the reality. So I'd encourage that. The professors try to find ways just to take some time and reach out to those businesses. And 2, cultivate a LinkedIn profile and presence. LinkedIn is your professional footprint today in today's world. And when I left, I didn't have a LinkedIn profile. I had to build one up, but it's been an enormous tool for me just to connect with people. Other liberal arts PhDs, other people who have my background. We connect all the time on LinkedIn, and I built these special relationships with people through this. It's a great tool for building a community, particularly in the liberal arts, to find ways of generating those relationships. And also, it's a way for you to stay in touch with your former students. If you have a student who goes off to, say, work in the business world or work in the tech world, invite them back. Ask them. I mean, I came here to talk about my own experience, but there are many other people just like me. Ask them to come to your classroom and talk about how their liberal arts training plays a role in their job today. Students will love that. How many students would love to hear that? Former majors to come and to talk about the way in which their training is pertinent to what they do to this very day. I use my classics it's hard to explain, but take my word on it. I use it all the time in my company. They know it. They call me Professor Zimm. I'm the prof of my company. Every company should have at least one, probably no more than 2 in-house classicists. I'm a strong believer in that. I get one of the most common requests, people love to ask me about Greek and Latin etymologies. That is the origin of words. That has value. I'll have one of my friends will come over and say, hey, we have a client, they have this product, what's a good Latin word we can use for it? And I go through and I think, okay, this could be good, that could be good. And unless you think that's an anomaly, I want to share with you a story of another classics PhD who graduated in the late 70s, and he left academia probably around the year 1980, and he decided to transition to the private sector, and he eventually became a programmer, and he helped build a startup which was eventually bought out, and he did very well for himself. But he was telling me that during his transition period, this would have been 1980, 1981, he did some, shall we say, branding consulting using his Latin background. And a brand manager who represented a big automobile company approached him and said to him, hey, we have this new car coming out and we want a cool name. Could you use your Latin to help out? said okay, he's like, well, what's the car? And he said, well, the car is about luxury. It's going to be about, you should feel very safe in it, it's going to be a luxury line of car. He said he thought about it, he said, well, there's a Latin word, cura. It means care, can also mean anxiety. And there's a preposition in Latin called a or ab. It means away from, absent of. He's like, he's like, well, if you combine a and cura, you get accura. And this manager said, I like it, but let's call it Acura. And he's like, no, you're not accenting it correctly. But they had an argument, and the brand manager, he won. He's like, well, you know what, sorry, but Acura is going to stick with the public. So that's the origin of the name Acura. And he told me he's a bit frustrated because it only took him 2 hours to come up with that, but he didn't get any residual royalties from the brand name. But these are the stories you can find of people in the private sector today. In my case, of course, there are nonprofits or all sorts of different organizations one can join. My own passion are startups. That's what I love, and that's what I love to be in, and I get tremendous pride that I can take my education and every day apply it in my company. And I want to conclude with this. There's this tendency to think that data can only be handled by people that are data scientists or coders. That's actually not true. I think a data scientist or a programmer, they might look at data and look for very clear outcomes from that. They're going to look more narrowly, but look at very actionable things you can do very quickly from that. I think someone with a liberal arts background is going to look at that data and think big picture. And it's not like one is better than the other. You need both. Because when you combine those two people together, the programmer and the liberal arts person, you start to get something approaching wisdom, in my view. And at the end of the day, you will all get advice. But if any parent or anyone else ever knocks your decision to study the liberal arts, don't sweat it. And just remember that there's eventually a startup out there that may hire you. And I'll conclude that. Thank you. And I'm happy to take any questions anyone may happen to have in the time we have left. Yeah. What's your name? Miles.
Can you wait a second? Because I want you on so we get you on video. No pressure.
So what does digital surgeons actually do?
Great question. We do digital marketing, we do digital consulting, but among the things we do website redesigns. We do web analytics. So web analytics is the practice of, it's the use of data. There's so much data out there. And when you structure that data, you can figure out things along the lines of how long someone's on the page for a website for. What is the average number of page visits? It goes on and on and on. It's really incredible the amount of data we have out there now. And part of what I do is actually limiting the data, figuring out what's meaningful and what's not to the client. On my end, I work on the search engine optimization, the consulting part of the business. So that is, again, it's looking at the back end of a website and seeing, for example, I see here on your websites you're lacking this particular feature. Your website's not secure, it's not HTTPS. You're being penalized by Google for that. And the algorithms are going to lower you in the search rankings. And as you know, no surprise here, most people, for example, I think 97% stop on page 1 of Google. So the difference between being ranked number 10 and number 11, it's worth a lot of money to a business. And the way Google works is all based on keywords. You Google leather shoe. What's going to show up for leather shoe? What's going to show up for Lincoln, Nebraska? You'll see Wikipedia, because Wikipedia happens to have very high domain authority out there in the eyes of Google, meaning everyone links to that website, and therefore that the algorithm, the famous page algorithm developed by Larry Page, says increase that website's presence. And therefore, when someone Googles it, show them number 1. Because again, most of us also won't go beyond the top 4, the very top of the real estate, the search engine results page. So that's a very complicated process to work with the client, figure out how we're going to improve your process and help you rank for the value keywords that are going to make money for you. What I work on, which is tricky to explain, is the Google advertising system, which is perhaps one of the most complicated business advertising tools ever developed, the one in which Google developed this advertising system. Just to give you an idea, if you don't know what you're doing, do not use it under any circumstance. It's very easy for you to have put an extra zero. Instead of $50, you're doing $500, and presto, a month goes by, you've spent $14,000. Good luck getting the money back from Google. It's a very complicated tool set. But the bread and butter, I'd say, is a lot of website redesigns, helping websites improve, making sure they're optimized for search, along with these other features like search engine optimization and paid digital media. But I do all that there. But just as I knew nothing about any of this before I joined, zero. But in my mindset, I said, well, I was pretty good at ancient Greek. I still am pretty good at it when I left, but if I can do that, I'm sure I can figure this out. Yeah.
What I got from your presentation is that you're a very creative mind, and you also were willing to think outside the box. And these were really what got you, in the new sector. How do you think universities, especially liberal arts programs, could really capitalize on those to really emphasize creativity as well as thinking outside the box, but through as part of the training, as part of the program, rather than just individual drive?
I read an article fairly recently, I think it was in the Chronicle of Higher Education, about a professor from, I think it was a state university in Texas. And she was thinking about that exact same question that you asked yourself. And she was wondering, how can I use my English class to build a relationship with local companies? And I think if I recall what she did was she encouraged all of her students to take an internship, but then to, I think, formulate the internship into a story, which they then had to present to the class. And I think it was a great idea because it combined the potential for a student to get an internship and to really learn and to practice what they were getting from that class, but to also get work experience, and for them, they themselves, to take what they're learning and say, this is what I'm getting out of the class. That could be one, I think, creative way in which professors could try and encourage their students to reach out to local communities and find local businesses or local communities and find ways to connect the skill sets they're getting in that class with those business needs. It's a win, as far as I'm concerned, that's a win for everyone. Because we all know that oftentimes businesses will say, well, what's the value of the liberal arts? And that often does not come from a bad place. Sometimes it's a genuine question, like, what is the value of this? It doesn't necessarily require defensiveness. You should hit that out of the park. That's a home run question. Let me show you the value of it. You hire this person for free for 2 or 3 months. It's not really for free because they're getting credit out of it, but the business is gaining as well, and they're going to see what they're getting out of, say, an English major. Because I think it's fair to say, and you can tell from my background, you don't need to preach the value of it to me. What I get a lot of joy out of today is meeting people that might be skeptics, but then at the end, most people I know don't question the value of classics anymore. They love it. As I said, they get a free education because of me.
What's one thing that you wish someone with a more typical background in software would take it to heart, something that maybe bugs you that you've seen a lot with software engineers or the like?
So what's your name?
I prefer not to say
No problem.
because we're recording.
But it's a great question, but here's my answer to that is that with software engineers, I seldom encounter any negativity. I tend to get a lot of creativity from them and curiosity. They ask me quite a bit about part of my renewed passion for liberal arts has come from these interactions with software engineers who just love to hear about this and talk philosophy, talk history, talk natural history. I had an entire discussion about the development of the whale's ear. We didn't build a client for it, but it was a great conversation. If there was one thing that they could take from it, is that I tell them, you think in terms of computer languages, but if you really want to push yourself, try ancient Greek or Latin or Sanskrit or any of these ancient languages, because it'll actually make you rethink the entire concept of a language. Or we're increasingly thinking of JavaScript, of PHP, C++, these are all computer languages as languages, but when you study a language, whether it's dead or living, it's an eye-opening experience, and it makes you look at culture differently.
We had a conversation at lunch and just talking about the process of like automated positions, right? So losing occupations to automation. What kind of advice might you give to people that are fearful that these positions aren't going to exist because computers can run them? I mean, I can self-prescribe myself with WebMD and we don't need doctors anymore. So
I'm more worried about the positions that exist today rather than the ones that are rather than 10 to 20 years down the road, the ones we don't know exist. A lot of the advice that I got in the past, and friends of mine have suffered for this advice, was through good intentions, they would get advice of study this because it's valuable in today's world. But the reality is 10 to 20 years from now, we don't know what the world really needs. And some of my friends who made decisions based on what worked well in the 80s and early 90s now found themselves trapped in positions, and they're trapped due to debt from the graduate schools they went to, have told me, I asked them, would you give the advice that your parent gave to you, to your child? And they said, absolutely not, no way. Do not do that. I think that the world is certainly changing rapidly, but I'm a strong believer that if you're open-minded, if you're willing to always retrain yourself and take on new skill sets, then it's your oyster. Because I wasn't trained to do what I was doing, technically. The very technical skill sets I didn't know. But I was open to taking on new skill sets, and I'm always open to learn new things. I'm trying to learn JavaScript right now just for fun, for no other reason other than fun. And I hope in 5 to 10 years I'm not doing exactly what I'm doing right now. Because I view life as just it's a constantly moving stream. It strikes me as boring for me to imagine myself doing the exact same thing I'm doing now 5 years from now. I like this form of existence where I'm constantly doing new things. So if you're open to adapting, I mean, I really believe the world belongs to those that are willing to adapt. You will constantly be able to do new things. I'm more worried about people that might train themselves for very set skill sets, and then it's not clear in 10 to 20 or even 30 years what's the nature of that job going to be. As someone who was open to take on new things, even if my job happened to be automated in 5 to 10 years, I'll learn something new, rest assured.
My name is Regina. I think one of the things that is very clear is that one of the reasons why you have been able to be this successful is you have a PhD, which by definition means we are extremely good at learning a lot of new stuff very quickly and communicating it to others. It doesn't really matter what the PhD is in, that's what the value of a PhD is. Most of our students will earn a a 4-year degree and not go on. So they're going to be in a slightly different position. What advice do you have for those of us who teach undergraduates who may not go on to graduate school on how to improve their outcomes? Is it the same advice?
I'm going to correct you. My PhD was a liability. You'd be amazed at how often it worked against me. I wish I just had a 4-year degree in that sense. I'm very proud of my PhD because of what is a personal goal in my life. I was amazed at how many people dismissed me from a PhD. They're like, oh, he lives in the clouds. He doesn't know how the world operates. He invested 6 years in that. No way. We're not hiring him. And even in my company, amongst a couple of people I'm still close with, I was told that when they hired a Yale PhD, the reaction was, they're so pretentious. Why? Why are we hiring someone like that? To which I said, that's not me. I'm pretty down to earth. I'm not like that. That's not who I am. And people in my company, they know that now. They look at me differently and as PhDs differently, but there's certainly an assumption that a PhD can perhaps think he's better. He or she is better than the rest of us. And that's not me. So I feel like in many ways it's probably easier for a liberal arts grad than it had been for me. And just to give you another anecdote showing an example of a liberal arts major who was able to pull off a position at a startup. There was, I think I said this over lunch, but I'll mention it again. There's a restaurant technology company in the Cambridge area called Toast. And I read a fascinating article about a girl who was an English major, and she wanted to get a break into the startup world, and she secured a meeting, I think, with a manager at Toast, which is a fast-growing restaurant technology company. It had, I think, over 400 restaurants using this technology. But she didn't have any technical background. It was a company that was scaling, so there really was very little room for fat. And they asked us, well, what are we going to do with an English major? But she did something that no one else in the company ever thought of. When she secured the meeting with the manager, she took that morning to go around the Cambridge, Massachusetts area, and she visited a bunch of different restaurants, and she asked to speak with the chefs and said, hey, what do you think of this technology? And she got their insights, she wrote it down, and she very quickly synthesized a PowerPoint presentation. All this within, I think, a few hours. And then when she went into the meeting, she met with this manager and said, hey, I got some input about your technology, and here are some problems with it. They were blown away, because no one in that company had ever thought of asking local chefs what they think of this technology, their end user. No one thought about it. And she did that. And they said within a short amount of time, the board said, we got to hire this person. And I think she's currently now the head of growth for the company. But that being an example of someone who, had a liberal arts degree and was able to articulate the value strictly through critical thinking. Just figuring, well, no one's probably asked that question. They probably need that. So let me synthesize that. And they clearly saw value there because they hired her quite quickly.
Time for one more question.
Okay. Hi, I am a career coach in the College of Arts and Sciences, so I talk about these kinds of things with students all of the time, so I'm really excited that you're here. We taught a career development course last semester, and early on in the course, one of our really just like bright, very accomplished students asked us, well, what if you don't have a passion? And passion and curiosity, these are, of course, words we use frequently when we're talking about the liberal arts and career development and things like that. And she said, well, what if I don't have a passion? And that sort of has kicked me off on this whole long sort of journey of discovering, well, what does passion mean? How do we define that? How do we talk about it? What is its relationship with curiosity and all of that? So I'm just wondering how you might respond to that student.
That's a tough question.
I know.
It's an interesting question. I think a lot of people that are in the liberal arts or majoring have already found that they've already reached that point where they have some passion there and they're doing it. No one majors in classics for fun. It's just, or you're trying to coast. Doesn't exist, okay? That's not why someone studies classics for sure. You're out of your mind if you take classics for an easy A. It's not going to happen. I think for myself, well, let me reverse engineer that a little bit, that question, because when I left, some people said, you're leaving your passion. When my wife talking to her, and when I said, I think I want to leave academia, she was crying, because she said, I don't want you to leave your passion. And I said, I'm not leaving my passion, I'm simply redirecting it and taking the passion I have and going to appropriate it for some technology startup. That is what I'm going to do with it. And it's very much, it's constantly metamorphosizing within the company itself, where I get interested in new things. It can be hard for people, I understand, to find what it is that they're passionate about. But the one way, I think the easiest way to find it is look around and don't stop. Read articles. I'm constantly reading articles in the Atlantic, the New Yorker. Is there any value? Pure interest. That's it. And finding that. And I constantly develop new passions through just being open-minded enough to try different things. And sometimes the passion that I have now, it didn't exist a few months ago, but I discovered it. And passion is very much, it's a process of discovery. And they shouldn't feel, and no student should feel like, well, I don't have a passion now and therefore it's not there. You can often discover it. Just be open-minded and look for it. If it's not there right now, it's okay. Just keep on looking around, keep on reading, and you will eventually find something.
I like kind of what you said, like if you said passion, you kind of said passion is a process. So it's active, it's not one static thing
No.
at a time. It's a skill set that you use to approach different ways, different things that you encounter in life, things like that. So it's a very active process.
Very much so. In fact, when I come to CEO, I asked him, I was like, Pete, what's my biggest skill set? He's like, your passion, Mike. He's like, that's like, I like your passion.
So I just want to say thank you so much, Dr. Zimm. This has been absolutely fantastic. We have a lot of curiosity and passion in the College of Arts and Sciences, and we love to have people be able to talk through and think through what their life is going to be like. So thank you so much for your talk.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.